they avoid it. And it's the one thing that could save them. They avoid the mirror. Not just the glass one they look into while fixing their hair in the morning, but the one that shows their true condition. The mirror of accountability. And the reason is simple. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to face yourself honestly. It's easier to point outward. It's easier to say it's the job, it's the boss, it's the government, it's the parents, it's the economy. It's easier to cast the blame somewhere else than to stop, look straight into that reflection, and admit the truth. No, it's me. I need to change. You see, avoidance feels safe. It gives temporary comfort. But the problem is, comfort without accountability only delays the pain. And the longer you delay it, the bigger it grows. I've seen it over and over again. People know the steps to take. They know what discipline looks like. They've read the same books you and I have read, but nothing changes. Why? Because they refuse to tell themselves the truth. They'd rather say maybe tomorrow instead of it has to be today. Now here's the interesting part. The mirror never lies. You can fool others for a little while. You can even pretend with yourself for a season, but deep down you always know. You know when you didn't give your best effort. You know when you skipped the commitment you promised yourself. You know when you chose comfort over growth. And that knowledge, it eats at you. That's why so many people live restless lives, not because they don't know what to do, but because they've stopped holding themselves accountable to do it. Mr. Schoaf always said that if you want to know the real measure of your progress, don't ask your neighbors, don't ask your coworkers, don't even ask your family. Ask the man in the mirror. He'll always give you the right answer. And he was right. When you start each day by asking yourself honestly if you're becoming the person you said you would become, that's when you stop avoiding and start advancing. So this is not about adding more knowledge to your plate. It's about pulling out the mirror and looking at what's already there. It's about asking the hard questions. Am I being honest with myself? Am I holding myself accountable? Am I willing to face the truth, even when it hurts? Because the truth is, accountability may sting for a moment, but avoidance will break you for a lifetime. People usually think of accountability as something unpleasant, something heavy, something that restricts them. But the truth is, accountability is not a burden. It's the beginning of freedom. Excuses keep you trapped, but accountability sets you free. Because the moment you take ownership, you regain the power to do something about your situation. I've met so many who said if only they had a better boss, they'd be further ahead. Or if they had more time, they'd be healthier. Or if their family supported them more, they'd be more successful. Now think about those statements for a moment. They all point the finger outward. They all place responsibility somewhere else. And when responsibility is somewhere else, the solution is somewhere else too, which means you're stuck waiting, hoping, complaining. But accountability, real accountability, brings it right back to you. It forces you to admit, if it's going to change, I've got to change. That might feel heavy in the moment, but it's the most liberating realization a person can have. Because once you stop waiting for things outside of your control to change, you can finally start changing what you can control, yourself. Now, excuses are attractive. They let you off the hook. They give you a story you can tell yourself about why you're not where you want to be. Excuses create sympathy from others. They give you a soft place to land when life gets tough. But excuses never move you forward, not one step. Excuses might make you feel comfortable today, but they rob you of tomorrow. Accountability, on the other hand, is not always comfortable, but it is productive. Accountability makes you uncomfortable enough to grow. It makes you look in the mirror and say, am I doing what I said I would do? Am I living according to the standards I set for myself? Or am I just hoping things will turn around on their own? Years ago, I knew a man who had all the potential in the world. Smart, talented, gifted in ways that others admired. But he had one big problem. He always had a reason why things didn't work out. If a business venture failed, it was because the timing wasn't right. If he missed an opportunity, it was because someone else got lucky. If his health declined, it was because his schedule was too demanding. And I'll never forget what he said one day. He told me success just wasn't meant for him. And I thought, there's the tragedy. Not that he lacked potential, but that he kept giving it away to excuses. But see, I knew another man around the same time who didn't have nearly the same natural talent. He wasn't the smartest in the room, wasn't the most charismatic, didn't have the best connections. But he had one thing the other man didn't: accountability. If he failed, he owned it. If he missed the mark, he asked himself what he could do differently. And because he always looked at himself first, he kept getting better. Over time, he surpassed people who were far more talented than him at the beginning. Because while they kept making excuses, he kept making adjustments. See, the difference is simple. Excuses protect your pride in the short term, but accountability builds your future in the long term. One is about saving face. The other is about saving your life. Excuses say, I can't because of this or that. Accountability says, I can if I just do that or this. See how that works? Excuses are easy. Accountability is harder. But excuses always cost you more in the end. So here's the question. What are you carrying right now? Excuses or accountability? If you catch yourself saying you would if only something were different, that's an excuse. But if you're saying you haven't yet, but you will, that's accountability. And once you train yourself to make that shift, everything changes, because you stop being a victim of circumstances and start being the author of your own story. And isn't that what we all want? To write our own story, to shape our own future, to build a life we can be proud of. That doesn't come from excuses. That comes from accountability. And the first place accountability begins is with the mirror, which brings us to the next idea. Facing the truth about yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it hurts, because that's the only way to grow. The mirror is one of the simplest tools you'll ever own, but also one of the most confronting. Because when you stand in front of it, the truth shows up. No excuses, no disguises, no stories to cover it up, just you. And that can be uncomfortable because the mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't bend to your explanations. It doesn't care about your reasons. It simply reflects what's there. When I was younger, I used to think the mirror was for appearances. Your tie, your hair, your suit. But I came to realize the mirror has a far greater purpose. The real mirror is not just about how you look on the outside. It's about who you've become on the inside. Because the greatest accountability is not to your boss, not to your neighbor, not even to your family. It's to yourself. And you can't fool yourself forever. So, if you don't like where you are, change it. You're not a tree. You don't have to stay in the same spot. You got to ask yourself, do you like who you've become? Do you like the results you're getting? Do you like the story you're writing? If the answer is yes, wonderful. Keep going. If the answer is no, then you've got work to do. And the best time to start is now. The danger most people face is they avoid the mirror altogether. They don't want to look too closely at their habits, their choices, their inconsistencies. It's easier to stay busy, to stay distracted, to compare themselves to others and think at least they're doing better than someone else. But progress doesn't come from comparison. It comes from honesty. And honesty begins with looking straight at yourself and asking if you're doing all you can with what you've been given. I remember talking to a man once who said he hadn't looked in the mirror for years. Not physically. He shaved every morning. But mentally, emotionally, he hadn't looked at his life with clear eyes. He admitted he'd just been going through the motions, avoiding the truth of how much he'd let himself slip. That's what happens when you avoid accountability. Slowly, without realizing it, you lower your standards. You tell yourself you'll get serious tomorrow. And one day you wake up and realize a whole decade has gone by while you've been promising tomorrow. The mirror doesn't judge you. It doesn't condemn you. It simply reflects the truth. And the truth, if you'll face it, can save you. The truth might hurt for a little while, but denial hurts forever. That's why people who succeed, people who grow, people who change their lives, those are the ones who make friends with the mirror. They use it daily, not to criticize, but to evaluate. Not to beat themselves down, but to call themselves up. You see, accountability isn't about guilt. It's about responsibility. It's about recognizing that if you're behind, that's on you. If you're ahead, that's because of you. Either way, you're the one who has to take ownership. That mindset shifts everything. Because the moment you stop running from the truth, you can finally do something about it. You can adjust your habits, raise your standards, and demand more of yourself. And here's the other benefit of the mirror. It keeps you humble. Because success can be just as dangerous as failure. When things are going well, it's easy to pat yourself on the back, to get comfortable, to think you've arrived. But the mirror will remind you, there's always more you can do. There's always another level. The mirror will ask if you're still growing. Are you still learning? Are you still striving? And if the answer is no, then you know it's time to get moving again. So the question for each of us is this: do we have the courage to look in the mirror? Do we have the courage to face ourselves honestly, without excuses, without pretending? Because the mirror is the one thing most people avoid, but it's the very thing that could save them. And once you accept that truth, you're ready for the next step, choosing the standards you will hold yourself to and refusing to settle for less than what you're capable of. Standards are the invisible lines that run our lives. They're the quiet rules you live by, whether you've written them down or not. Everyone has them, but not everyone chooses them. And that's the problem. Because if you don't set your standards deliberately, life will hand you some by default. And the default is usually far below what you're capable of. I've met people who say they just go with the flow. And maybe that sounds easy, maybe even pleasant. But going with the flow usually means you end up wherever the current takes you. And it's rarely someplace you choose for yourself. Standards are the way you anchor against the current. They're what keep you from drifting into mediocrity. They declare who you are, what you will accept, and what you refuse. Without them, you'll bend to every circumstance, every influence, every opinion. Mr. Shoaff told me years ago that if you don't set your own standards, someone else will set them for you. And he was right. Your boss will set them. Your peers will set them. Society will set them. And none of those people are as invested in your future as you are. That's why you must decide what's acceptable in your life and what isn't. Think about your health. If your standard is, I eat whatever I feel like, you'll eventually pay the price. If your standard is, I'll move my body once in a while when it's convenient, you'll suffer the consequences. But if you raise your standard, I nourish my body because it carries me through life. I train it because strength is freedom. Suddenly, everything changes. The same is true for your finances, your relationships, your career. Low standards invite low outcomes. High standards attract high results. Now, setting standards isn't about perfection. It's about alignment. It's about saying, my behavior must line up with the person I want to become. And that's where accountability and the mirror come back into play, because the mirror will show you if you're living below your standards. It will call you out. It will force you to admit, I said I'd rise early, but I slept in again. I said I'd save, but I spent. I said I'd grow, but I wasted my time. That's not condemnation. That's opportunity. That's the chance to correct course before another month or another year slips away. There's a story I often share about a man who set the standard in his industry. He wasn't the most talented. He wasn't the most educated, but he set himself apart by refusing to do anything halfway. If he cleaned a floor, it sparkled. If he gave his word, he kept it. If he shook your hand, you knew it was solid. Over time, that reputation carried him further than raw skill ever could. People trusted him because his standards were unwavering. And eventually, that trust became his greatest asset. The same principle applies to all of us. What are your standards when nobody's watching? Do you keep promises to yourself the way you keep promises to others? Or do you let yourself off the hook because no one will know? But here's the truth. You will know. And when you break promises to yourself often enough, you erode your own confidence. You stop believing in yourself because deep down, you know you don't follow through. That's why raising your standards is the key to restoring self-respect. Some people say they don't want to set their standards too high because they don't want to be disappointed. But disappointment is temporary. Regret is permanent. You'll recover from disappointment, but regret will eat at you for a lifetime. That's why it's better to aim high and miss than to aim low and hit, because the pursuit itself transforms you. Even if you fall short, you'll be stronger, wiser, and more disciplined than if you had settled. So the challenge is this: raise your standards and then protect them. Don't lower them just because someone else won't meet you there. Don't compromise them just because life gets difficult. Stand firm, because every time you do, you reinforce your identity. And every time you compromise, you weaken it. The person you become tomorrow depends on the standards you enforce today. Now, once you've set those standards, the question becomes, how do you live them consistently? Because a standard written down is only the beginning. The real test is when the pressure's on, when no one's around, when excuses sound convincing. And that brings us to the next lesson, the discipline of daily practice. Because standards without discipline are just wishes. Discipline is the bridge between setting a standard and living it. Without discipline, your standards are just nice ideas, like a map that never takes you anywhere. But with discipline, even the smallest effort compounds into something extraordinary. And the truth is, discipline doesn't come in big dramatic moments. It comes in the little choices you make each day, the ones that seem insignificant but ultimately decide your direction. Think of it like this: one workout doesn't make you healthy. One book doesn't make you wise. One act of saving doesn't make you wealthy. But the discipline of doing these things consistently, day after day, week after week, creates a future that nothing else can. That's why most people underestimate discipline. They're looking for some breakthrough, some secret, some lightning bolt of inspiration. But the real breakthrough comes when you stop waiting for inspiration and start relying on discipline. Success is nothing more than a few simple disciplines practiced every day. And on the other hand, failure is just a few small errors in judgment, repeated every day. And that means both success and failure aren't big events. They're the result of little habits multiplied over time. And the difference between the two comes down to whether or not you'll practice discipline. Now here's the challenge. Discipline doesn't always feel rewarding in the moment. In fact, it often feels inconvenient, uncomfortable, even boring. Waking up early, putting in the extra work, saying no to temptations, it doesn't feel glamorous. But the payoff isn't in the moment, it's in the accumulation. It's the harvest you reap after months and years of planting those small seeds of discipline. The problem is, most people want the harvest today and aren't willing to wait for the season to come. Here's an example. I once knew a man who decided he'd start reading just 10 pages a day. 10 pages. That's nothing, right? But he was consistent. 10 pages every day for a year turned into 3,650 pages. That's the equivalent of about 15 books. 15 books in a year, just by sticking to a small daily discipline. At first, no one noticed, but over time, his thinking changed, his conversations changed, his decisions improved. And eventually his results reflected that. That's the quiet power of daily discipline. Now compare that with another man I knew. He said, I don't have time to read 10 pages. Instead, he watched the news, watched TV, or just filled his evenings with whatever was easy. Day by day, it didn't seem like a big deal. But year after year, the gap widened. One man built wisdom, the other built excuses. And that's what discipline does. It creates a gap between those who practice it and those who don't. Here's what I found. Discipline isn't about doing extraordinary things. It's about doing ordinary things consistently. The extraordinary is just the ordinary compounded. Show me someone who sticks to the basics with discipline. Eating right, working hard, saving a little, reading daily. And I'll show you someone who will have an extraordinary future. And on the flip side, show me someone who neglects the basics, skips the workout, spends carelessly, never invests in their mind. And I'll show you someone who will eventually pay a price far greater than they expected. Another thing about discipline, it doesn't get easier, but you get stronger. At first, it feels like pushing a boulder uphill. But the more you practice, the more you build the muscle of self-control. Pretty soon, what used to feel difficult becomes part of who you are. And then you start looking for the next challenge, the next standard to raise. That's how discipline builds momentum. It transforms you from someone who struggles to keep promises into someone who thrives on keeping them. The bottom line is this: discipline is the foundation of freedom. Most people think freedom means doing whatever you want, but real freedom comes from discipline. Because when you have the discipline to manage yourself, you're not enslaved to your impulses, your habits, or your circumstances. You're free to design your life intentionally. And once you taste that kind of freedom, you'll never go back. So the question becomes, where do you need to apply discipline right now? Where have you been letting yourself slide, telling yourself it's just one day or it's not a big deal? Because those little errors in judgment add up. And just like small disciplines multiply in your favor, small neglects multiply against you. The next step is learning how to correct those neglects quickly before they grow into something bigger. And that's where responsibility comes in. Responsibility is the other half of the equation. See, discipline gets you moving, but responsibility keeps you honest. It's the ability to look in the mirror and say, I'm the one who got myself here, and I'm the one who can get myself out. Most people never want to do that. They want someone else to carry the blame: parents, boss, spouse, the government, the economy. But here's what I've learned. The day you stop pointing fingers and start taking responsibility is the day your life begins to change. Now, responsibility doesn't mean guilt. It doesn't mean shame. It simply means ownership. If the results aren't what you want, you own them. Not so you can beat yourself up, but so you can adjust, correct, and improve. Because the truth is, nothing changes until you own it, and once you do, you suddenly have the power to fix it. Remember, you are not a tree. You're not stuck. Trees are stuck. But people, we can move, we can decide, we can change. Yet most people act like trees, rooted in excuses, rooted in habits, rooted in blame. Responsibility uproots all that. It says, no matter what's happened, I can choose differently starting today. Now, responsibility also means paying attention to the small things before they become big things. Neglect is easy. Easy to skip the meeting, easy to ignore the budget, easy to put off that conversation. But small neglects always grow. A little crack in the foundation, left alone, becomes a collapse. A little dishonesty, left unchecked, becomes corruption. A little laziness, repeated daily, becomes failure. Responsibility means catching yourself early, before the neglect compounds. Think of it this way. Life is like sailing a boat. The winds will blow, the current will drift, storms will come. That's circumstances. You can't control them. But responsibility is the hand on the rudder. Even if you drift off course, you can pull it back, realign, and move forward. Without responsibility, the boat just goes wherever the tide takes it. With responsibility, you may get blown off course, but you'll always find your way back. So ask yourself, where do you need to correct right now? Maybe it's in your health. Time to take responsibility for the choices you've been avoiding. Maybe it's in your finances. Time to own up to overspending and get disciplined about saving. Maybe it's in your relationships. Time to admit where you've been neglectful and start showing up with more effort. Whatever it is, the sooner you own it, the sooner you can fix it. And here's what I've found. People respect responsibility. They may not like it in the moment, but in the long run, they'll trust you. Why? Because when you own your mistakes, they know you'll own your successes. Responsibility builds credibility, and credibility opens doors. You can't buy that. You can't fake it. You earn it, one responsible choice at a time. The real danger is avoiding it. Most people avoid responsibility the same way they avoid the mirror. They don't want to look too closely because they know what they'll see. But the one thing they're avoiding is the very thing that could save them. The mirror is uncomfortable, yes, but it's also liberating. Because once you're willing to look, you can finally start changing what you see. Most people spend their entire lives dodging the mirror. Not just the one hanging on the wall, but the one inside, the mirror of accountability. Because when you really look, you can't lie to yourself anymore. You see the habits that have been running you, the excuses you've been making, the potential you've been wasting, and that's uncomfortable. That's why so many avoid it. But avoiding the mirror doesn't make the truth go away. It just delays the change that could save your life. The mirror doesn't care about excuses. It doesn't care about your intentions. It only shows you results. If you say you've been trying to get in shape, the mirror shows whether you did or didn't. If you say you've been working on your finances, the mirror shows whether the numbers prove it. If you say you've been putting effort into your relationships, the mirror shows whether they're growing or falling apart. The mirror is brutally honest, but that honesty is what sets you free. Now, most people run from that honesty. They'd rather cover it up. They'll change the lighting, change the angle, put a filter over the image. They'll compare themselves to someone worse off so they don't feel as bad. But here's what I've learned. Pretending doesn't change reality. If the foundation is cracked, no amount of paint covers it for long. If the habits are weak, no amount of talk makes them strong. The mirror brings you back to reality. And reality is where change begins. I remember talking with a man who kept telling me about his potential. He'd been saying for years that he was going to start a business, get healthy, turn his life around. But every time I saw him, nothing had changed. One day, I told him not to talk about potential, but to show proof. Show the calendar, show the bank account, show the habits. That's the mirror. He didn't like hearing that. But a year later, he came back and admitted it was the turning point. He finally faced himself in the mirror and realized the only thing in his way was him. That's why accountability is so powerful. The mirror forces you to ask, am I doing what I said I would do? Not what you meant to do, not what you hope to do, but what you're actually doing. And here's the truth. Discipline and responsibility are meaningless if you won't look honestly at the results they're producing. Without the mirror, you drift. With the mirror, you stay on track. Now, accountability doesn't always mean you alone in front of a mirror. Sometimes it means inviting someone else to hold it up for you. A mentor, a coach, even a trusted friend. Someone who won't let you hide behind your stories. Mr. Schoaf did that for me. He didn't let me get away with excuses. If I said I didn't have time, he'd ask me to show him my schedule. If I said I didn't have money, he'd ask me to show him my spending. He held up the mirror until I couldn't deny what I saw. That changed me. So let me ask you, when was the last time you looked honestly in the mirror? When was the last time you measured your progress? Not by your intentions, but by your results. It's not always pleasant. In fact, sometimes it's painful, but it's necessary. Because until you face the truth, you'll never change it. And the good news is, once you do, the mirror doesn't just show you what's wrong, it shows you what's possible. It shows you the new life waiting on the other side of honesty. The mirror is not your enemy. It's your greatest ally. Because the sooner you stop running from it, the sooner you can start running toward the life you were meant to live. Most people think the mirror is there to condemn them. But the truth is, the mirror is there to save them. Because when you finally face it, you don't just see the weight of your excuses. You see the path forward. You see the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And that gap isn't meant to discourage you. It's meant to motivate you. That gap says, here's the work that still needs to be done. Here's the proof you haven't built yet. But you can. See, the mirror doesn't lie. It won't flatter you when you've been lazy. It won't sugarcoat the fact that you've drifted. But at the same time, it won't hold back from showing you progress when you've been faithful. When you've been disciplined, the mirror celebrates with you. When you've stuck to your habits, the mirror shows you the reward. It reflects both failure and victory. And that's why it's so valuable. Because if you only ever hear praise, you'll get soft. And if you only ever hear criticism, you'll get bitter. But the mirror gives you the truth, and the truth balances you. Now here's the question you've got to answer. Will you run from the mirror, or will you use it? Because make no mistake, the mirror will always be waiting. You can ignore it for weeks, months, even years. But eventually, life has a way of holding up the mirror whether you want it or not. The moment your health breaks down, the moment your finances collapse, the moment your relationships fall apart. That's the mirror showing the proof of your neglect. Far better to face it early with courage than to be forced into it later with regret. And here's the key. If you understand this, you will be unstoppable in life. Pain of discipline weighs ounces, but the pain of regret weighs tons. And that's exactly what the mirror is about. A little pain now, or a lot of pain later. Which one will you choose? The mirror is painful in the moment, but it saves you tons of regret down the road. That's why it's not your enemy. That's why it's your ally. Because it points you to the small corrections you can make today before they become big disasters tomorrow. So if you want to turn your life around, start with the mirror. Don't ask what your potential is. Ask what your proof is. Don't say one day you'll get around to it. Say today you'll start building evidence. Show yourself day after day that you're capable of change. Show yourself week after week that you can be trusted to follow through. Because in the end, the world doesn't pay for potential. It pays for proof. And the mirror is where that proof begins. Remember this, you cannot lie to the mirror, but you also cannot escape it. And that's good news. Because once you accept that reality, you stop wasting energy running from the truth, and you start using that energy to change it. And when you do, the very thing you once avoided becomes the thing that sets you free. The mirror doesn't destroy you, it saves you. It doesn't tear you down, it builds you up. If you'll let it, the mirror will change your life.